Good morning, everyone. I trust you're all well. This morning's learning is dedicated in memory of Ben Yomin Akiva Ben Shlomo Leah Bas Bible, and Rav Yaakov Tzvi Ben David Aryeh Tiv Bas Mordechai Avram Ben David Slavin Tzipora Fegel Bas Ram Baruch Shalom Ben Eli Beina Bas Bible for Shoshana Bas Yaakov Shmuel Caleb Bela Bas Henoch Yom Yochia Ben Moshe Eliezer Samaka Bas Ben Yomin Shlomo Yechia Ben Yeshua Levi Avram Mordechai Ben Moshe, as well as the Yortzeit for today: Mordechai Ben Yosef Bentley, Leah Bas Yisrael Lightman, Julia Barnett, Reuven Aram Ben David, Benjamin David Savage, Rachel Bas Maya Rose, Miriam Bas Maya Yitzchak Rosen, Reuven Aram Ben Benjamin David Savage, Hindechava Bas Svi Lautenberg, Hirsch Ben Volk. We wish all the respective families long life and only simplest. Good morning, everyone. Lovely Monday morning, and we are looking forward to learning with everyone. So we're learning Ethics of the Fathers. We're up to the second chapter, second Mishnah, 2:2. Okay, and let's have a look at what the Mishnah has to say. This Mishnah is also quite famous and a subject of huge contention. Rabbi Gamliel ben Osher Rabbi Yehuda Nasi Omer. Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehuda the prince. Remember, we had Rabbi Yehuda the prince yesterday, so now we're on to his son. We're moving through the generations. Yafa Talmud Torah Derech Eretz. So beautiful or good is the study of Torah with Derech Eretz. Derech Eretz refers to a livelihood. Shigir Shnehem Mishkachas Upon, that when you have the two combined, then sin is forgotten. You don't come to sin. V'chol Torah she'eini mo malacha, and any Torah that does not have with it malacha, work, sofer b'teila v'gareres upon, in the end is going to be nullified and will cause the person to sin. V'chol ha'oskim b'imah tzibur, and anybody that's involved, we know what tzibur is, with a community, you oiskim mahem l'shem shemayim. Person has to engage in the community for the right intentions. We'll come to what exactly are the right intentions and what are the wrong intentions. Okay, that the merit of the forefathers will assist him, and the righteousness will endure forever. And I, God, will bestow upon you as great a reward as if you had accomplished it on your own. This is an action-packed Mishnah, and we could speak from now to when the cows come home. I'm not sure when that is, about this Mishnah, but we're not going to. But let me just say good morning to my dear friends. Michael, good morning to you. Colin, looking well. Peter, good morning. Rachel, Michael, Harry, and all of those that are joining us across the world for this learning of Pirkei Avos in memory of our loved ones. Should be a schus for them. So let's deal with the first part. So Torah learning exclusively, right, without work, without being self-sufficient, is, we said, it will cause a person it could cause a person to stray. Why is that? So the commentators explained that the first concern would be that if a person doesn't have a livelihood, right, then they, out of desperation, may turn to illegitimate means. So that's the first thing. So the other thing is that when a person, as we all know, when you are working for a livelihood, then you are kept busy, right? You are kept busy. That is, in fact, one of the reasons why God created the world in the way that he did, forcing us, that you're meant to go out and by the sweat of your brow, you're meant to work, you're meant to earn a livelihood, earn your crust. And that is in order that we are preoccupied. We all know that when people have too much time on their hands, then they start thinking and fantasizing and get distracted. And before you know it, they can end up doing the wrong thing. In fact, that is what happened in Egypt. Pharaoh, we know, when Moshe asked for one day off for the Jewish people so they could rest, he says, if you've got time to think about a day off, you've got time for these fantasies and these dreams, clearly you're not working hard enough. And therefore he increased the workload of the Jewish people. But back to the Mishnah. So the Mishnah is telling us that the ideal is that a person should learn and should work. Okay, what's called Torah and Derech Eretz, which is very much the philosophy which has been adopted and followed by Rab Samson Raphael Hirsch, amongst others. And therefore, you're not meant to be relying on the community. Now, there if we look across the course of history and we look at the greatest of sages, there are, when you go further back, then this was certainly the model. For example, if you go back to Maimonides and Nachmanides and the like, then they were able to synthesize the learning, incredibly long hours, and able to, Rambam was a doctor, and so therefore through that he was able to earn a livelihood and be sufficient and independent. And of course, the idea of being independent means that you're not going to be swayed as a leader of the community by those that are financing you, those that hold the purse strings. But, and here's the big but, the problem that we have is that there are few people nowadays, or even going back, that would be able to dedicate themselves in the way that we need a number of people to do so from our rank and file, and at the same time be able to be a Maimonides and be a doctor, on the side. And if we go back to the time of the 12 tribes, there were two of the tribes, Yisachar, and there was Zevulun, and they realized that this was an impossibility. Zevulun wanted to work, was lived by the coast, seafarers, fishermen, and they wanted to work, and they didn't have time to learn. And then on the other hand, or not learn properly, and then you had Yisachar that were dedicated to learning. Okay, and the idea was that they struck up a partnership. I don't know if you've heard about this. A partnership. They struck up a deal that they would. Yisachar would dedicate themselves primarily to learning and would be supported by Zevulun, and Zevulun would work, and then they would get half the reward for that Yisachar was earning, and that way they would both have livelihood and they would both be able to learn. Now, we don't have such an arrangement anymore, and for most of us, work is the mainstay of our lives, and we try, as we are doing now, to fix some time for learning. But there is this idea that there always have been a section of the rank and file of our people. There was one tribe, and therefore that has been followed throughout the generations, that would dedicate themselves, totally to learning and supported by the rest of the Jewish people. Now, we can have a long discussion about it, but that's the way it has been. And the idea is that we know that if you want to excel at something, if you want to do really well, you have to dedicate yourselves. You can't just do 10 minutes here and 10 minutes there. It is an impossibility. One of the reasons why we have the Jewish people, we find ourselves living spread around the world in a different time zones, is because we believe, and we've mentioned it before, that one of the pillars that the world exists and is supported by is the idea of learning Torah. And therefore, if we've got people learning at different times, in different zones, different places, then you are always going to have Torah, which is sustaining the world. And therefore, there is this idea that throughout the day, throughout the week, there are always people dedicated which are learning. And thank God we're back in Israel, and there are some people, which are dedicated to learning. Most are working, but there are some which are working. So the key thing is that it shouldn't be a burden on the community, and that where a person can be self-financing, independent, self-sufficient, that is the way to go. Okay, that is the way to go. Let's finish off the rest of the Mishnah. Good morning to those that are still joining us, to Andrea, to David, to Michelle, and everyone else who's already here. Anybody who's involved in the community, how should they approach it? You should do so for the sake of heaven. What exactly does it mean? How could you not be involved in the community for the sake of heaven? Well, there are ulterior motives that a person could have. For example, they want to make a name for themselves. They want to be respected, or they want to be recognized for their communal efforts, right? It may be a status thing, or they want to wield power. That could be another reason. They find that this is where they want to channel their frustrations, or their the lack of creativity in life, and therefore it's possible that that the person could be involved in community for the wrong reason, for themselves. But sooner or later, that is found out, right? But the point of this mission is that a person who involves themselves for l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, they're doing so for the good of the community. They want to make a difference. They want to contribute to the greater good. They're not looking for plaudits. They're not looking for recognition. They just want to help other people and to move the community forwards, right? Then their righteousness endures forever, right? Because their efforts will perpetuate, right, through those that they've touched. That's what we always say. It's interesting at a shiva. I was on one last night. It's a weird thing to say, isn't it? I was on a Zoom shiva last night, but from another community, and they were, people, when somebody passes on, they automatically are thinking about what did the person leave behind, what did they contribute, and that should drive us throughout our lives to think about that when we are helping somebody, when we are contributing to our community, to our society, that is the best investment you could possibly make, because it will be in some shape or form passed on to the next generation, and therefore it will, as the Mishnah says, endure forever. Okay, and therefore we know that every year we have the book of life and the book of death that is taken out on Yom Kippur. And the question that the commentators are puzzled by is why is it every year? We understand that every year we have to be judged. But friends, I ask you a simple question. Why is it that somebody that has been dead for 50 years, 60 years, 100 years, why would we take out the book of death and judge them? Okay? So the idea is that there is what's called, according to many, the idea of a din v'cheshbon. There is a judgment when we are alive, and then there is the calculation that comes after we are alive, meaning that there is a constant recalibration and calculation of each of our lives after we've lived, because we live on, right? Our contribution in this world doesn't stop the day that a person passes from this world, for good or for bad. So if somebody, for example, is inspired by your example and they decide that they want to take over a certain committee, or somebody, for example, your kids are inspired to give charity or to do something, and you know why they're doing it? Because of your example, then that has to be calculated again, because you are still making an impact on people's lives and on the world even long after you're passed on. So therefore that is the idea of being involved in community, that it doesn't start and stop. And even when a community, and we know many communities that are no longer here in a physical, tangible sense, and yet we know that those that have been involved in the community have gone to to other communities across the world, but they've carried with them part of that community. I remember, doing Jeffrey Grossman Shiva, and I remember, hearing from the boys about the fact that they're in Male Dumim in Israel, and yet they continue to daven with the same tunes from Woodside Park and from Jeffrey, and it continues from generation to generation. And that's really what it's all about. So therefore, we should try to ensure, this missionary is telling us, and we're going to conclude, that we need to have a balanced life. We need to ensure that we have learning of Torah on the one hand, and we need to work and to support ourselves, and to ensure that those which are worse off than us, those that are poor, are supported likewise. And then we have to look to make a contribution to the wider community, our community, the wider community, so that that community will be able to continue from one generation to the next. We continue with Psalm 23. A reminder, and I'll remind you in a few minutes in case you've forgotten when I tell you now, that tonight we are honored to have Mr. J.J. Sussman. You can find out later what the JJ stands for. He is an extraordinary gentleman, extraordinary man that I have had the privilege of knowing for some 30, maybe 25, 30 years. And he's that's not why I'm having him on the show this evening. He has made a huge impact in Israel through his organization Gesher, and you will hear all about the way that he is bridging the gap between the divide and the differences in the different segments of the community. In other words, he is bringing unity. What we all long for, what we all pine for, this guy, J.J. Sussman, is making a difference, between the religious and the irreligious, the Sephardim and the Ashkenazim, the Hasidim and the non-Hasidim, Mizrahi, Ethiopians. Let's hear about it tonight, 8 p.m., Facebook and YouTube. Now we continue with Psalm 23. The Song of David, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He causes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even as I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You set a table before me in the presence of my adversaries. You anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord for the length of days. Memorial prayer. Don Elamim Zacho Es Nishmos Le'abas Bible Binyamin Akiva Ben Shlomo Rav Yaakov Tzvi Ben David Aryeh Sivya Bas Mordechai Avram Ben David Slavin Tzipora Pegel Bas Uram Baruch Shalom Ben Eleli Ben Abbas Bible from Rosh Hashanah Bas Yaakov Shmuel Caleb Bela Bas Enoch Yom Yochio Ben Moshe Eliezer Sar Malka Bas Binyamin Shlomo Yechia Ben Yoshua Levi Avram Mordechai Ben Moshe. And now the Yort sites. Mordechai Ben Yosef Bentley, Leah Bas Yisrael Lightman, Julia Barnett, Reuben Aram Ben David, Ben Yomin David Savage, Rachel Bas Meir Rose, Miriam Bas May Yisrael Rose, and Reuben Hinder Chava Bas Svi Lautenberg, Hash Ben Wolf, Shal Chulilamam, Began Aiden Temenu Kosam, Nachim Balarachamim, Yasi Rein Vesesekana Pavli Alamim, Yes, Zachet Shmasamanai Nachlasam, Yanuchim Shlamish Kavam. Ben Amar, Amen. Long life to all, and our full shlema. Mi sheberach avasein Rabbi Yisrael Yaakov Moshe David Shlomo Yivarach Rapes Achaylim, Babu Shanim Mispalim Babu Ram, Bez Chazak Hakadosh Baruch Hu Yimalei Rachim Aleihem Lachem Alafosam, Vishlach Lem Pushanim Shemaim Lachol Reim Basoch Shachal Yisrael, Refuah Sanefesh Husagov, Hashtabak Zmakarei Panoma. Amen. Full shlema to all those that are unwell. And lovely to see those that are joined us since I said good morning, Deborah, Estelle, Andrea, and everyone else. Look forward, please join us this evening right here. You don't need to go anywhere, right here on this channel at 8 p.m. this evening with Mr. JJ Sussman of Gesher. See you later.